The room was dark and empty. A spare room that I hadn't had the chance to do anything with. The electricity had gone out some time earlier. I had no source of light except for the flashlight in my hand, my lighter, and a candle I had bought just in case. I was sitting with my back in the far corner of the room. Flashlight pointed straight at the door on the other side. The beam of light danced on the wall across from me as my hand shook, having no idea and wondering what had been stalking me all day. I was coming back to the house from the grocery store today. I didn't have a care. I was biking, carrying my groceries in 2 plastic bags and a crate on the back. When I got home, I noticed that I was missing a bag. It must have fallen off when I was riding home. Thinking it nothing more than unfortunate luck, I picked up the bag and headed inside. I would just have to do without canned goods for a few days. I opened the door and almost immediately tripped on something piled in a heap inside my house. The groceries from the bag I was holding flew into the air and scattered as I hit the ground. I looked back to see what had tripped me, and there was a sloppy pile of canned food. Since I never locked my door, I simply dismissed it as a Good Samaritan act. Maybe someone who lived in the area was too shy to introduce themselves. I picked up all the food and stowed it away in the kitchen. It was getting close to nightfall. I headed upstairs to my bedroom. I grabbed a book. I flipped the switch on the bedside lamp and entrenched myself in a good story. As the night went on, I started to hear weird noises coming from downstairs in the kitchen. I told myself it was just my imagination. Each time I would notice the sounds, they would stop, and when I went back to the book, they would pick up again. My imagination would do that to me from time to time. Before I was able to finish my chapter, the lamplight flickered out. I put down the book, still open, pages down to save my spot, and I went to turn on the main light. It didn't come on either. The power was out. As I tried to remember where the circuit breaker was, the noises from downstairs resumed. It sounds like someone rummaging around in my kitchen. I grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand drawer, a bat from underneath my bed, and I head downstairs, each of the steps creaking on my way down. I got to my kitchen. The noises stopped. Bat ready, I point my flashlight all around to see where the intruder is, but I see no one. I see the canned food I had recently put away stacked neatly in a pyramid, just under the kitchen table. I swallow hard, thinking that someone was either playing some prank or some sick twisted game. I slowly creep toward the table, feet wet with orange juice and milk that had been spilled on the floor. When I get close to the table, I can hear breathing coming from beneath it. I stoop down to look. I saw nothing. I reach out to touch the pyramid of cans. As soon as my hand makes contact, the cans scatter. It was as if something burst through them, scattering them in all directions. I fall back onto the soaked floor, drop my flashlight. As I frantically look for the light, I hear the sound of feet splashing through the puddles on the floor. They run out of my kitchen. I got up and slowly follow the footprints made in the juice and milk. They're not human footprints. They're the same width and length, but the toes, they're much longer, almost as long as fingers. I follow them towards the front door, where they disappear. I calm down a little, thankful that whatever it was gone, but I don't loosen my grip on my bat. Slowly, I walk backwards towards the stairs, planning on locking myself up in my room and waiting until morning. As I did, it sounds like something wet hits the floor in front of me. I point my flashlight down at the floor, and my heart stops. There's a new footprint, this one pointed at me. I take another step back, another wet slap, another footprint. I turned and ran, tripping up the stairs, but making it to my room. I slammed the door shut, lock it, push the bed up against it, knocking my book down in the process. I set the bat down on my bed for a second and grab a lighter and a candle out of my nightstand. That's when I hear the first squeak. Whatever it is, it's mounting the first step in the staircase. I run to the opposite side of the room, where there's a door that leads to the spare room. I hear the second step creak. I throw open the door. It doesn't have a lock. I run inside and head to the far corner. I sit there quietly, breathing heavy, heart pounding in my ears. I realized that I left my bat on the bed, but was convinced by the creaking of the third and fourth step that it wasn't worth going out to get it. I sit there, counting the steps as they creak. 6, 7, 8, 9. My hands shake as I sit there. What is going on? 15, 16, 17. I try to control my breathing so I won't be found. 20. My heart pounds louder. Sweat flattens my hair to my head. The shaking becomes worse. 24. My knuckles are white as I clench the flashlight, the beam now dancing all over the wall, rarely landing on the door. 25. It had reached the second floor. Slowly the footsteps get closer. It approaches my room. I hear the knob turn. The door creaks open. The bed scrapes across the floor. I hear the bat rattle against the wood as it falls off the bed. The footsteps continue. Pages turned as whatever it was picked my book up and looks through it. Then comes a thud as it's dropped. It rummages through my drawers and my sheets, looking for something. Then, everything goes still and quiet, the silence only broken by my heavy breathing and the pounding of my heart. It stays like this for what seems like minutes, and the footsteps continue, closing the distance between it and the spare room. The door slowly creaks open, lingering ajar momentarily. My heart is ready to leap out of my chest. My mouth is dry. Sweat is sticking my clothes to my skin. This was it, I thought. I wait for something to come into the room. Nothing happens. Again, the excruciating silence, this time lasting for what feels like hours on end. Nothing happened. I was starting to believe that whatever it was had lost interest in me and left. Still, I sit in my corner, flashlight trained on the door opposite of me, slowly returning to a calmer state of mind. After God knows how long, my flashlight flickers out, leaving me in complete darkness. I reach for the lighter and flick it on. My gaze shot toward the door. Still nothing. I look around the room. Nothing. I get up and slowly cross the room to the door. I close it and sit with my back against it just in case. Still, the silence reigned. Finally, I let out a sigh of relief. It was gone. I went to flip the light switch, but still the power was out. I light the candle instead, and I become aware of something standing in the opposite corner of my room. My heart freezes in my chest, and my lungs refuse to work. It hadn't been there before, but it was now. In a frenzy to get up and run, I knock the candle over and it goes out. I grip the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was stuck, locked inside with who knows what. I search the floor for a lighter and flick it on. I look around. It's gone. I'm alone. Breathing heavily, I found the candle, all the while keeping my gaze on the far corner, where it had been just moments before. I bring the lighter to the wick. Life is breathed into the candle. It reappears in the far corner, exactly as it had before. The candle gave it away. I notice its feet, flat, long, bony. Its body is built the same way, abnormally skinny, just skin wrapped in bone. It was short, too. Like a child, it only came up to my waist, if that. Its knobbly arms were just long enough that its long, skinny fingers reached the ground as it stood straight up. It wore the remains of a tattered old gray cloak draped over its shoulders. It was bald, pale, had no ears or nose that I could see. The mouth was thin and lacked proportion, much like the rest of its body. And the eyes. The eyes were round and lifeless black orbs that simply reflected the candlelight. As I stared at it, the eyes seemed to calm me down. My heart rate slowed, my breathing steadied, and the urge to run faded away. Something about its eyes kept me gazing into them, unable to move, not wanting to if I could. I began to realize that it had followed me for quite some time, not just since the grocery store. It had been there since I was a child, watching me, waiting for me. It had followed me since then, and it had a purpose for me. I could feel its gaze drawing me in, helping me realize that I belonged with it. It stepped forward, slowly putting one foot in front of another, dragging its fingers across the ground. It came right up next to me, its gaze never leaving mine. As I stare down at it, and it up at me, it slowly raises one arm, holding out its long, thin hand. Its fingers are about twice my size, and I knew that normally this would be something to be afraid of. But as I gazed into the light reflected off its eyes, I began to forget my name, my past, myself. I took its hand. It patted my hand with its other hand. It took the candle and led me out the door, down the stairs, out into the yard. Together we walked down the street and up to the forest, the candle lighting our path. I stopped at the edge of the woods and looked back at the city. The creature tugs on my arm, insisting that I follow. I look into its eyes, and all of the worries are gone. Somehow, I know I have to hurry, because the others are waiting. I was not the first one he had found, nor would I be the last. I was going to join the others. I kept on walking, following the path that it led me down, lit by a mixture of candle and moonlight. As we strode, the wind picked up. The candle was blown out. It drops to the forest floor with a thud. I look around frantically for my guide, but it had disappeared. Still, there was the grip on my hand, pulling me down the path lit by moonlight. I will never be seen again. It's a quite normal-looking suburban neighborhood. I hate it when my work brings me places that remind me of my own home. It doesn't make what I do easy. Then again, this job isn't meant to be easy. I park my van in front of the house, a decent cookie-cutter two-story. Nothing special. I look down at my watch. It's 5:30. I'm right on time. I take a sip of my coffee. I need to be alert. There can't be any mistakes. I glance in my rear view to make sure no one's wandering the streets. I was made once. It got really messy. But I was a rookie then. I've gotten pretty good at this. Once I'm sure the coast is clear, I step out of my van, carrying a large duffel. I stop for a second to check my reflection in the window. I straighten my tie, brush some dust off my shoulders. Professionalism is key. Professionalism is the cornerstone of success. That's what they drilled into me during my training for this job. I approach the front door. There's no need to knock. No one will answer. I take a lockpick from my duffel and easily pop the lock and push open the door. The smell immediately hits me. It's not a strange smell. I'm quite accustomed to it by now. The iron-like stench of blood mixed with the scent akin to rotted meat. It's not pleasant, but it no longer bothers me. There are 2 bodies in the living room. Teenage girls, probably 16 or 17. They're mangled and disfigured. One is hanging over the couch, her mouth open in a silent scream. One eye is popped, the other stares blankly upward. There is a stab wound in her stomach. The attacker pulled the knife downward, spilling her entrails across the couch and the floor. The other girl is tangled in her bloodied sleeping bag. There are multiple puncture wounds across her body and face. I take out my camera, snap a few pictures before shutting and locking the door behind me. There's another body on the stairs. Male, late 30s, brown hair. He must have been on his way down to investigate the screams. Whatever killed him didn't take its time. His throat was slashed. A fallen baseball bat lays at the bottom of the stairs. I pick it up, examine it. He tried to protect his family, but against something he didn't even believe existed until it killed him. I feel a brief ping of admiration for the poor man. Most would be frozen with fear by what they saw. At least he put up a display of resistance, futile as it was. I snap more photos, cross into the dining room, leaving the upstairs for last. The final teenager is displayed on the table, spread eagle. Her head had been sliced off and placed on her naked stomach. Her hands and feet were also removed. The eyes had been popped out and replaced with small gold coins. I shook my head. Why was ignorance so harshly punished? I snap a few photos before I head upstairs. I check the master bedroom first. 1 body, female, mid to late 30s. She was in the closet, obviously hiding. Like the adult male, she'd been killed quickly by 3 puncture wounds, 2 in the stomach, the final one in the temple. I take another photo before continuing into the bathroom. I'm surprised by the lack of evidence. Normally, that's where everything started. Then I figure there must be something I missed in the living room. I head back down, do an additional sweep, being careful not to step on the bodies. Behind the couch was an additional bathroom with a large ornate mirror. Candles had been set up around it, as well as a Ouija board. I roll my eyes. Why don't these kids ever learn? It's sad, really. No one deserves this. I decide to change in here for the cleanup. I shut the door, strip out of my suit and tie, pull on a hazmat suit and a gas mask. I grab a large variety of cleaning chemicals, and finally, my silenced pistol. I've only had to draw 3 times. Fired it once. I hate arriving early to a scene. The first time I did, I saw one of them. The monsters I clean up after. He was crouched over the bed of his victim, having just finished his roll. It turned to me with a vicious smile. I drew my weapon and pointed it at its head. Maybe I could have killed him, or maybe he would have killed me. Either way, a monster would have died. But neither of us did anything. As much as we despised each other's roles, he recognized my necessity. and I followed my orders. Do not engage the entity. I get to work cleaning. It's difficult and painstaking, scrubbing blood out of carpets, bagging the bodies, removing all traces of whatever happened, collecting and labeling evidence. Most days I question why I do this. Is it so we can learn about these things before we eventually and hopefully kill them? Or is it simply to keep certain events out of the public eye? The mantra is, don't know, don't care. But it's hard to follow when I look at the fresh-faced girls as I zip their body bags shut. What kind of person was she? What kind of person would she have become? Surely no one deserves this. I close her eyes. It's against protocol to touch the bodies, but it seems the least I can do. There is a sudden knock at the door, and I freeze. I slowly approach it, weapon drawn, praying that it's not the police. The only time I discharged my weapon was on a police officer. I hadn't secured the scene properly. It was my fault. But I had to kill him. I'm relieved when the voice is that of an elderly woman, likely a neighbor. She won't attempt to kick down the door. She knocks one more time before leaving. I holster my weapon, relieved, and return to my grim, never-ending task. Finally, it's done. The bodies are laid out on the living room floor in airtight bags. The rest of the house looks like it could be in a picture from a home sale magazine. It's pristine. Maybe I should become a realtor if I end up getting to retire. I strip off my hazmat gear and get back into my suit. I adjust the tie in the mirror. Professionalism is key. I check my watch. It's only just turned noon. I carefully pack everything back into my duffel and exit out the back, making sure all the doors and windows are locked. Every day, I have to wonder to myself if I'm any better than the monsters that make the messes I clean up after. No, I don't kill innocent people, but I do cover up their deaths. In about an hour, an additional team will arrive and take the bodies to an undisclosed location to do who knows what with them. Have you ever wondered why certain crimes, especially relating to the paranormal, never make headlines? That's because of me, and 130 others like me. It's a dark and lonely life. I've never met any of my colleagues, so I have no support group, no one I can relate to. Interacting at a social event is painful, because every time I go to a bar, or a party, or on a date, or just have a beer with a friend, I can't stop thinking, what if they're next? He had stopped running, but only because he couldn't run anymore. His foot had hit a stalk at just the perfect angle to leave him face first in the dry clumps of dirt that tore through his shirt, bloodied his elbows, and sprained his ankle. He had found himself completely immobilized at the worst of times. He had tried twice to get back to his feet, but there was no way. He'd heard the disgusting pop when he fell. He knew he'd rolled his ankle, and in a bad way. He pulled his foot towards him with considerable effort, just to get a closer look at it. It had already turned a deep red in color. There was no way he was going any further. He was stuck. His leg was nothing but a momentary distraction from the unfortunate situation he was in. It only took a single howl for him to remember. It was still coming. He shot his glance upwards, back the way he'd come, down the row of endless corn. Down at the ground level, he could see quite a way, and to his excitement, he saw nothing. Only rows and rows of corn greeted his gaze. He couldn't hear anything either. The crows had stopped their incessant calls, and the breeze had died, silencing the rustling of the stalks. The silence should have filled him with comfort, and it did. For a brief moment, he wondered if maybe he'd imagined the thing, its voice, its call. Maybe it wasn't coming. But then the silence really set in. It was painfully heavy, collapsing in around him, squeezing his lungs. His breath hurried, trying to compensate. It wasn't natural. He realized that the silence meant that that thing could be anywhere. Maybe he couldn't hear it coming. Maybe it was already upon him, watching from somewhere close by. That weight was lifted by the closer, second call. The thing was definitely real, and it was coming for him, and he couldn't move. He felt warm tears as he tried to think. Walking was out of the question, but he knew that if he stayed there, it would have him. Whatever it was, it wasn't going to just give up or lose him. It knew he was in the field. It was coming. That was all certain now. The boy decided he had to do the only thing left to do. He started to crawl. He dragged himself across the rough, stalk-laden dirt towards the afternoon sun. Each time he dug his raw, scratched elbows into the dirt, it made him wince and gasp, but he tried to push past it. He was tough, just like his daddy told him. He had to be tough. He moved forward, ever so slowly, but constantly. His spirit wasn't gone yet, and he was determined. He wasn't very hopeful, for he knew in his heart there was no way. He was sure of it. There was no way that he could carry himself out of this field before it had found him. It would take him. It was this slow, drowning realization that seemed to add 50 pounds to his small body and pull the fight out of him. There was no way. As he began to weep, he heard it. A rustling from the distance behind him, only audible because of the dead silence in the air. At first, he thought it was something small, a bird, the return of the breeze, or at least that's what he hoped. He hoped that it was anything that wasn't that thing. But of course, it wasn't the wind. It wasn't a bird. Something was moving through the corn stalks, fast. He turned, and he lay there. For the longest time, seconds in reality, but minutes in his racing mind, he watched. The row remained as it was. Empty, nothing to be seen, as it should be. Then the foot came out of nowhere. He'd blinked right as it emerged from the row to his left, more than 70 yards away. It had emerged, and then, before the boy knew it, it had propelled the slender black thing sideways across the row. The corn shook in its wake. It was about 10 seconds before he saw it ruin his view again, this time one more row forward, one row closer. It was moving towards him, sweeping side to side. There was no hiding from it, and the boy knew it. The boy, finally freed from his fear, noticed that a small, rogue batch of corn grew a little thicker to his left, across one of the columns. Perhaps, just perhaps, he would be less noticeable there. At least, that's what his frightened mind told him. The corn had to help, because it couldn't possibly hurt. The child moved his body into the small patch, and there he could only ball up and prepare. He heard the crackling as the thing raced through the fields. Its hunt was ongoing, and soon it would come to its grisly conclusion. He used all of his will to keep from making a single sound, even as he wept. It would overlook him, he hoped. It would just pass him by. He bit his lip and wished he could wake up. Then it happened. The boy heard him, and his eyes widened. But this time it was in astonishment and disbelief. A quick smile crossed his cheeks as the warm sound came to his ears. Hope ignited inside him like a bonfire, and he turned. He heard his father and his father's friends calling his name. They must have heard his earlier yelling from before his fall, and they were now coming to him. In that single moment, never had he felt more relieved. His father calling to him was the greatest sound he'd ever heard. Hope returned to the boy. Again, his happiness was overtaken by that thing. It halted, if only for a moment, at the voices of the approaching farmers, and he saw it do so. Its form, obscured by the corn, halted and turned towards the boy's father. For a moment, the boy had another fear. What if the thing went after his father? Did he have his gun? Could he defend himself? Would it hurt his dad? He swore the thing would dart straight through the fields, turning all of its focus to his father. But instead, it had begun running across the rows, faster than it had before. It was speeding up. It had turned its full attention to finding and collecting the child, back to hunting him. Then came the dilemma. The boy wanted to cry out to his father. He wanted to shout. He wanted to cry. And he wanted to scream. But he realized that the only thing that kept whatever that creature was from taking him outright was the sole fact that it had no idea where he was. It only knew that he had started running away, and possibly that he had fallen. It probably knew that he had fallen. That's why it was searching the ground. His father and his father's friends sounded close, closer than that thing, but he couldn't see them. Even if he called to them now, he knew that the chances of the beast reaching him first were high, too high for his comfort. He faced forward, and now the creature was only about 50 yards away. He could make out its figure more clearly in the fields. The speed was remarkable. It was the singular most horrifying thing about his pursuer, its ungodly speed. Turning around, he saw movement in the corn. His father was getting close, almost as close as the thing was on the other end. He was sandwiched between the two, and he had an important choice to make. He closed his eyes. In the darkness, all was the same. There was a rustling and a crackling from in front, and the snapping and calling from his rear. That thing and his father. Both were closing in, faster and faster. There was only one thing he could do to possibly help. Either his father would pick him up and fight the thing off, or the thing would steal him away, never to be seen again. The choice was made when he turned back around, and he opened his eyes just enough to see his father moving sideways through the field. He had started moving away from his son. His heart sank when his father disappeared from view, and the creature still came closer. He could only mouth no, as his father and his hope faded from sight. The thing, however, was still coming at him. His fate was sealed. The boy closed his eyes. He knew it would happen. The crunching from in front was nearly upon him, and his father's voice grew slightly fainter. He clenched his teeth. There was the final, irrational thought that maybe it would miss him. Maybe it would. But then, it was too much to risk. There was only one thing he could do. A final act of pure desperation. The child called out, and they heard. They all heard.